All right, episode 11 and 12 with the famous Kaylee.
Hi.
So I've asked Kaylee, this is Startup Nation, Nate and Kaylee. What I've asked her to do today is come by and chat with you guys a little bit about some of her experiences. Kaylee owns the gym that I go to and I thoroughly enjoy called Hardcore Fitness. They have grown from 0 members to over 650-ish in less than 2 years, so an incredible growth rate. But by no means is that not she's made some mistakes, some learning lessons. She has definitely worked her ass off. So the next 2 episodes are one going to be about how hard she's had to work, the work ethic behind it, and the continuing education, which will be episode 12. And episode 11, we're going to go more into the generalization of her story and some other questions that I have for her to get her to, I think you'll be able to relate to a lot. So listen up, episodes 11 and 12, Startup Nation.
Yeah.
All right, on episode 11 today, we're going to talk about Kaylee's adventure, her story here, and then, I don't know the best way of putting this, but basically the doers of different services, if it's a plumber, if it's an electrician, if it's a personal trainer, and how they convert that to an actual business owner, because that transition a lot of times either fails or is extremely difficult. I know Kaylee's story probably better than most, and I know a lot of things she's been through, and she is one of the most resilient people that I know. But she's going to tell you some pretty funny and interesting stories. But before we do that, just tell them a little bit about your background. Like I mentioned in the intro, 0 to 650 members in less than 2 years. And they've done very well from a revenue standpoint. And she's built an amazing culture at this gym. But it definitely hasn't come easy. So tell them about kind of your journey as a personal trainer and how that's evolved to where you're at today.
All right, well, I've been training for about 10 years. I got my degree in kinesiology, finished that in 2009, and then went right into getting my CSCS, my strength and conditioning certification, right out of finishing college just because my brain was fresh. And I was up in the Bay Area then, and I decided to move to San Diego because it's supposed to be the place where everyone wants to be in their bikinis and be fit. So I went there, and now it's been 9 years since I've been here. It'll be 9 years in March. I've kind of bounced around different places as far as working as training. Coming in fresh to San Diego, I didn't really know anyone. So I tried to do my own thing for a minute. It's hard to find clientele as a trainer when you don't know anyone. I had a few clients, and I finally found a job at I think it was Fitness Together, small little studio training. Was there for a bit, and then I found another studio. So I've kind of bounced around different spots, just kind of making my way into the industry. While doing that, I started my own little boot camp outside because San Diego isn't that, we're always nice usually, except for right now it's kind of cold. I had my own little boot camp called KR Fit, and I had between probably 10 to 15 people, nothing crazy, but it was something that kind of got me going where I was learning all the business stuff of, you got to have a business license, you have to have this, you have to have that, which a lot of people don't really know, and I don't really have a business background. I'm knowledgeable in training and science and all that stuff, but when it comes to business, I never really took a business class, so I really had I didn't know anything.
Trial and error, right?
Yeah. So long story short, was doing all that stuff, and then I finally found Hardcore Fitness, was a member, did a challenge, then Tommy Reynolds hired me on as a trainer, and I basically worked there for about 2 to 3 years until I had the opportunity to open up my location, Hardcore Fitness North County. And now we'll be 2 years in May. Like Nate said, we went from 0 to over 600 members now, but it hasn't been an easy journey. And the biggest thing that I always talk to him about and other people is that I've gone from training for the last 10 years to straight to business owner. I've never been a manager of anyone. I've been a leader on a team, a captain on my basketball teams. I've been a leader in the positions I'm at, but I've never actually had to manage a staff. Mm-hmm. So from being very comfortable in training, and I can come up with workouts quickly. I'm good with people. I know what I'm doing at this point with personal training. Then I got thrown into the business side of things and owning a gym and having staff, and I had no idea what what I was even doing, and it is that trial and error where you have to be like, okay, now what?
So talk about that, because my story is obviously a lot different, and the purpose of today's podcast, I won't get into it too much, but I actually started with a business experience and not knowing the actual functional side of cleaning hoods in the case of Green Guard services. And so I had to learn that, which in my opinion was probably easier now that I have experiences with people like Kaylee, because business experience, in my opinion, is something that's either you have support with it, or it takes years to learn. Why, like, for example, in hood cleaning, does it take years to learn? Sure, but the reality of you learn 90% of it in a year, right? It takes years to learn personal training, so that's not the same comparison. But from my perspective, that worked out really well for Green Guard services. So I know that some of the things is that and we'll talk about this in the next episode, the amount you worked, but talk a little bit more about some of like the struggles and some of the things that, the leading of a team and managing people is definitely one piece of it. But we could talk about hours about this, but it goes down from inventory to taxes to dealing with landlords to dealing with broken equipment to dealing with preventative maintenance, and just the list goes on for 8 miles. So just talk about some of your experiences with that. Maybe give some advice to people out there on how they should start with that, where they should reach out for help, things like that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me with the business part is like all the legal stuff. Like, get help with that. Mm-hmm. And that's something you do learn in a business, which I still struggle with because it's more of the control thing, is trying to be in control of everything. But if you don't know something, like, don't be afraid to ask someone, because you can fake it till you make it to an extent, but when it comes to the legal stuff like taxes and
human resources,
anything with how to deal with your staff, permits, all that kind of stuff with the buildings, it's things you don't really think about going into a business that are really important. I know, like, we had an issue with our sales tax. Like, we didn't really know much about that. So, we were late on stuff, and you live and you learn. Now we know. But yeah, it's those little things. Like, when you own a business, you're not just the business owner. You are you're the owner to your staff. You are the picking up all the crap that's on the ground. You're cleaning the bathrooms. You're checking inventory. You're doing every little thing, right? Until you can get a system in place where you're not having to do that all the time. But as a business owner, that's, I think, your main thing is you always see that stuff. Whereas your staff comes in, they might not see the little thing that's on the ground that you see, you're gonna pick it up, right? There's just more of like the operating things that I know I've struggled with as far as implementing, which I'm working on now. Thankfully, I have Nate to help me with that kind of stuff because he has that experience. But you've got to reach out to people to get that help on the stuff that you're not strong in. My strong suit is I can teach classes, and I'm good at the training and
the culture,
building all that up. Good with the members. It's the behind the scenes stuff that no one sees that I'm still learning, that I spend most of my time on now to get better at. I know I could still get better in my training, but my biggest thing now is focusing on bettering my business side of things, which to me kind of sucks in a point because I have to take a step back from the stuff that I really love, which is training and working with people. But I know in order for my business to succeed, I've got to take the time to learn the more legality of things, just learning to be on top of stuff and consistently, hound landlords when things aren't going right with the building, stuff that's usually out of your control, and you kind of just like, all right, well, I could just sit back, but no one else is going to do it. Like, you have to be the one that makes the effort to make things change.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a good point. Even though when I started Green Guard, I had a decent amount of business experiences from the variety of positions that I've held, clearly there's a major learning curve for me a decade plus ago to where I'm at now. Like, I understood the difference between an S Corp and an LLC. I understood the basics of what a P&L and an income statement looked like in a balance sheet and all that stuff. But the reality is that experience is what you need. So even though I could sit here and train Kaylee on what a P&L and balance sheet looks like, even more than she already knows, but the reality is that she's gonna have to look at that every single month for the next year before she's like, okay, now I'm comfortable with it, right? And so even if somebody like myself or somebody that's a consultant to a business or somebody that's going to support you, you got to make sure you're engaged in that type of function to the extent to where at least you're dangerous, right? Unfortunately, I've heard of too many scenarios. One of which comes to mind where a friend of mine had a bookkeeper that worked for them, and they were basically embezzling money to the tune of $250,000 as a small business, and it's because he was not dangerous enough to at least know what the hell was going on, right? And so that's why I say, even though it maybe isn't your expertise, you still have to know enough about it to at least make sure you're conscious of what's going on in your business, right?
And you also know you're gonna fail, and I feel like I've learned so much in the last year and a half because I've failed so many times at like not knowing something, just having no idea that I even needed something, or doing something, I'm like, all right, that didn't work, let's find another route, right? And then once you kind of find that one way that works, it's about being consistent with everything and continuing on, just like I tell my clients with their food or their workouts, like you have to be consistent. The same thing falls into business. Like you have to be consistent with the things that are working, and then eventually it falls into place.
In a small business too, there's certain things that you got to be really careful about when it comes to making mistakes or failing, right? So failing in the context of like saying I'm going to teach a booty class we just talked about this the other day at like 6 a.m. versus 10 a.m. Not gonna move the needle one way or another, right? If it fails because you got 2 members at 6 a.m. versus 1 at 10 versus 10 at 10 a.m. but you started at 6 a.m. no big deal. You learned your lesson. Things like workers' compensation, where you don't carry it, or paying people improperly due to the fact that you're skirting the laws of how you pay people, which Green Guard did in the very beginning. I'll be honest. Mind you, this again was 10 years ago, so calm down, everybody. The way you pay overtime or the way you control your HR. Just because Kaylee has 10 employees, call it, does not mean she still doesn't have to be conscious of HR. I would say, to be honest with you, the gym world, because everybody's so tightly knit, is probably more of an HR compliance potential issue than it would be with my 60, just to be honest with you. And it's just because of the relationships that exist in a gym and all the clients versus where my guys are cleaning their heads at the middle of the night and 95% of them are male because of just it's a male-driven type of environment, even though we interview women and all that. So it's one of those things where you have to be aware of those things, and those types of things can actually be catastrophic to a business if those decisions aren't made right, because all it takes is one class action or one labor board complaint or one sexual harassment claim and those things. And if you're not protected, that's where a lot of small businesses actually fail. And so thinking or going into it not asking for help or understanding that type of stuff, even if it's through education from somebody else's experience, can be catastrophic if you're not making good decisions. So be very, very careful on doing that. Kaylee actually employed a company recently. They're called a professional employment organization. The name of the company is Avitas, but there's a bunch of them out there. CoAdvantage is another one that's really good, and they specifically help with the risk assessment, human resource compliance, things like that. So they can, if you have sticky situations, they help with the administrative side of it. But the point being is that she employed that, saying, I'm not super comfortable with all this stuff. I want to make sure we're doing everything right. And luckily they didn't have a lot of things to change, but it is additional protection for you.
It's also just amazing once we brought them in to help how much more knowledgeable I became about certain laws, knowing that how much they change every year. Yep. And you have to be on top of it, because one little mix up and you could be sued.
I mean, it's something as simple as the way like trainers are, where they work split shifts. If they didn't pay their employees the way they do, so they're protected, the split shift law could require them to pay their employees more. They pay enough for that split shift law through the calculations, which we're not going to get into in this podcast, allows them to be protected, right? They're fine. But if you paid minimum wage and you had a split shift, that law changed in January, and now you can't do that anymore in California. The same thing applies for if you're commission only, or if you're you're paying per job, and like a lot of my industry still pays, go clean that hood and I'll pay you $100. You can do that in California, but you're going to get screwed, because at the end of the day, you're probably paying under minimum wage. You're not paying the right overtime wages, which are not just time and a half in those circumstances. And so all those weird, like quirks associated with how you pay people, California is very specific on that. I mean, other states are too, but California specifically is very strict on the way you pay people, so you're not like evading the way to pay overtime or way to pay commissions out, things like that. So, and those things change, to your point, yearly. And if you're not familiar with that, you need to make sure that you're up to date. So,
and those are just the little things that, like, you start a business and you don't really think about in depth what you're actually going to need to know. And I mean, again, like I'm almost 2 years in to our business, and I feel like I've just scratched the surface of what I need to know, which At this point is exciting to me because I am someone that I don't like to be stagnant. I like
to learn.
Once I get somewhere, I am a big nerd with learning. It's always been a science side of things, but now I'm trying to switch my mindset to more of the business side and incorporating that into everything that I do. But yeah, it's going to take, I'll be 2 years, I think maybe 10 years down the line, maybe I'll finally be at a point where I'm like, yeah, like I'm a businesswoman, I know my shit. I'm good to go, right? Maybe start something else. But at this point, like, I feel like you need to take those little steps each month, each year to keep learning and master your craft before you start jumping around to different things. At least that's in my mind. Like, that's how I work. I like to master what I'm at. And I feel like I've pretty much mastered with training. If I put more time to it again, I could even be even better at it. But business right now is kind of the thing I'm trying to tackle and learn more about so I can make my business stronger in every aspect. Training, being a manager of my staff, keeping the culture alive, making sure classes are good, and making sure that back end and everything's taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is you're still doing continuing education. It's just at what level you want to take that. But as a business person, as a business owner, you rely on your staff, the different trainers that you have to be the ones that continue to bring new things to the table while you're essentially now having to run the business, right? And so even though you want to do more of the training, the reality is that's not the position you put yourself in. And so, and you're relying on people like myself and other people to help you with that because, again, you don't want to make any catastrophic decisions when it comes to, employment and all these other things that you just can't afford to make mistakes on. But it's good that you're learning that now because it does, unfortunately, unlike other types of professions, not to say all of them, it takes a lot longer to learn than it's not like reading a book and you're going to pick it up in a year.
Yeah. And that's just you have to be comfortable with asking for help. And that's something I have struggled with the last year and a half because I'm used to doing everything by myself, especially I had my own little boot camp that I was learning and, I think at how small I was doing everything fine.
Yep.
But now I'm like, I have so much underneath me, like I have to ask for help. And it's uncomfortable for me because it's out of my comfort zone, which I know he's talked about a lot, but like you have to do it. And it does make your life easier by asking for help. Do what you're good at and get help from other people that are good at the other things you're not good at.
Well, the reality too on that, and she brought it up earlier, is, and this is, people have heard the saying for gazillion years, but you don't know what you don't know. So you can sit there and act like, oh, well, I know how to run a business, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, crap. So now Mary said that John talked to her inappropriately, and now there's going to potentially be a lawsuit. Well, do you have EPLI insurance? Well, I don't even know what that is. Well, it's like, that's an insurance that will save you from your business not going down. You realize that, right? Like if they sue you and it ends up being a $250,000 suit because those types of suits are like that, guess what? You need to have that insurance. So now it's only a $25,000 deductible versus $250,000. But you're going to sit there and say, oh, I got everything covered. Well, you'd be surprised. The majority of businesses don't have EPLI insurance. EPLI insurance covers things like discrimination, sexism, racism, those types of claims, which a general workers' comp company won't actually provide. The PEO she has does. You can also buy that insurance separately, but I would suggest anybody that doesn't have that, especially if you're growing, look into it. It's inevitable that probably sometime in your life you'll have to deal with some type of complaint, not necessarily like suit, but some type of complaint when it comes to that. I luckily haven't in 10 years, but it doesn't mean it won't, right? I didn't think my building was ever going to catch fire too, and that's happened once 4 or 5 years ago, right? And so when people say, oh, it's never going to happen to me, just to be completely frank with you, you're being ignorant. If you could read the future, you probably wouldn't be in the position to even talk to me at that point. And so you just got to protect yourself in those environments. So I've had the luxury of speaking to a pretty successful, and that's an understatement, restaurateur, David Cohen, many times in San Diego. One of the things that's always stuck with me with him, even though I was aware of it, but he just put it very eloquently, is that there's always going to be risk in business. There's no such thing as zero risk. Because if you were to have zero risk, you'd put so much money into your business, you would be bankrupt. So it's just the amount of risk you want to assume, right? And so from Green Guard Services standpoint, he's big into, well, I'm not going to assume fire risk. It's one of those things I'm not screwing with. No different than the gentleman that owns the 55 Carl's Jr.'s, the franchise that we service. I've spoken to him, and he said, 2 things that keep me up at night: fire and robbery. Everything else I can assume and risk. Somebody breaks their ankle, somebody crashes into something in my building, those are things I can accept, right? And so there's certain things in any business that you're going to have to accept responsibility or potential risk for, right? People get injured in a gym. If you're going to try to eliminate that, nobody's going to go to your gym, right? Don't lift more than 5 pounds, right? But when it comes to things like discrimination, race, the EPLI insurance, paying people legally, HR compliance, those are things you just don't want to mess with. And you don't know what you don't know, so make sure that when you're a small business, you understand those types of things, and it's really important. Reach out to me if you need connections or people you need to know. I went through this a couple times. It took me literally 9.5 years to open up my second business, and now I'm on to my third. But it took that amount of education to learn this stuff to get to the point, which is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot, but I don't know. I mean, even the EPLI, I know what that is, but to an extent that I could actually explain it like you did, no, I can't do that yet. I know all the terms now. It's almost like I need my flashcards.
You just know you need it.
I need repetition on everything. It's going to take time.
So it's important when it comes to businesses, and again, the only thing I would advise you of is, and I'm not trying to make this complicated, is who you trust. Make sure it's somebody you truly trust and you still have education. If it's finances, I would, to be completely honest with you, I'd have like a double check on that. I would have a CPA and a bookkeeper. Don't know each other, no affiliation to do it, because especially when it comes to finances, because it's so easy to hide money and the way you do things with books in a lot of businesses, it's just not worth screwing with. When it comes to things like HR or risk and safety, you don't necessarily need that. You just need somebody that you can actually qualify as a specialist, which is why these PEOs are good, because they actually take a lot of the liability, with it. So if they make a recommendation, the recommendation fails, and you follow it to a T, they have a certain level of liability as well. And so those types of things are really important, because essentially those are non-equity business partners that have a lot of liability too. They don't want to mess up, right? And so having that type of association, I think, is quite important, right? Fair.
Yeah.
So today's episode was more about just understanding the transition from a trainer, a plumber, an electrician, a camera guy, to a business owner, and the fact that there's an immense amount to learn, relevant if you're on the business side or if you're on the other side of it.
Just know you're going to have to put the work in.
Yep, and that she meant to do that, by the way. And so this is episode 11, talking about that, Startup Nation with Kaylee. Episode 12, we'll talk about the work you got to put in for it. So thanks for listening, guys. Please follow, subscribe, share, comment. It's on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all that fun stuff. It means a lot to us. And any last words?
No.
Good stuff. Thanks.